Hello, this is Mona Tajev, past president of NCSM, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders, the Game Changer series. Join me and my co-host, John Sangiovanni, as we sit down and have conversations with emerging and established leaders about how they are changing the game in mathematics education. Gandhi said, we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. So listen as we talk to mathematics leaders who are being the change that they want to see in mathematics education. We will learn about their inspiration, perceptions, and of course, their game-changing actions. Mathematics leaders, we know that the status quo is unacceptable, so it's time to change the game. That is right. It's time to change the game. And hello, I am Mona Tajev, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders, the Game Changer series. John Sangiovanni and I are the co-hosts, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Jim Ewing on supporting emerging multilingual students in mathematics. So if you Google math ELLs, Dr. Jim Ewing's name comes up on top. Jim has written 4 books and 10 articles on how to support English language learners in mathematics. He is one of the authors of the newly released joint position paper for NCSM and Todos, Mathematics for All, entitled Positioning Multilingual Learners for Success in Mathematics, and his latest book, Math for ELLs, too many L's there, As Easy as Uno, Dos, Tres, is a great resource for supporting this work. Dr. Ewing is an associate professor at Stephen F. Austin State University and is an international speaker and partners with schools all over the country. His workshops and presentations are engaging and informative. And so I just want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us today to discuss how to change the game for emerging multilingual learners.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, John and Mona, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we are excited to talk with you tonight. Want to get started and just jump right in. Our new series is about mathematics leaders who are changing the game of mathematics education. So a question we have for you and our listeners want to know, what does it mean to you to be a game changer?
Well, first of all, John and Mona, I would say that you two are game changers. The fact that you're actually doing this and asking the question, I think is very important. So thank you for having me, and thank you for asking these important questions. If you are listening to this conversation, then I would say that you're a game changer as well. But for me personally, game changers are those that really talk about how we play the game, as you can hear from the definition. For example, about 15 years ago, I went to a math conference and something was just rubbing me wrong. I wasn't sure what it was. And towards the end of the conference, we all came together and I looked around and I whispered to the person next to me and I said, "It's awful white in here, isn't it?" And she looked at the walls and I said, "And I'm not talking about the walls." And so for me, I'm sharing this story with you because for me, game changers are those that change the way we play the game and who's involved in these mathematical conversations. I really admire Dr. Shelley Jones, for example, because she talks about positioning Black women to be mathematicians.
That's awesome. So I'm going to jump in to conversation around, in the opening, I mentioned your work with positioning multilingual learners. So what I noticed, and I actually have the book. thing I noticed when I was reading, which I know in the book you've done this, but it's also in the position paper, is we clearly define the use of multilingual language learners, which is not what most states use. When you look at student groups, it's either ELs or ELLs. So I'd like to hear from you is why should we not use the term ELL or English language learner?
Sure, that's a great question. And I saw you had a copy of my book, and it's actually called Math for ELLs. And I'm intentional in that. But if you open up the book, then I give an explanation. In this case, I wrote the book about 1.5 years ago, and I was using the term emergent bilingual, which I think is asset-based. But I even like the term multilingual learner better. And so rather than me just telling you this, because we were talking about game changers, and game changers for me don't just tell, but they set off an emotion. And so in order to change is hard. In order to set up that emotion, then I think it's important to experience things. And so can I give you an analogy here, and all the listeners as well? If you're driving, don't do this, but if you're not driving, let me just ask you a question. Mona and John, are you right-handed or left-handed?
I am right-handed.
You're both right-handed, right? So about 92% of us are right-handed. But what do you think it's like to be left-handed and to live in a right-handed world?
It's different. My nephew's left-handed.
And what challenges does he have? Sorry.
Challenge, like when we sit down at the dining room table, like he has to sit in a specific part, or he's elbowing somebody the whole time. Yeah,
Sure.
it's very different. So even like writing, even when I'm observing, I have a student teacher this year who's left-handed, and she's writing on the board. And as she's writing, she's covering everything up. And she's like, my students can't see. And I said, well, I'm going to have to ask a teacher who's left-handed to help you. Cause I'm like, I don't have that problem.
Sure, because we have that privilege. We have right-handed privilege. And so let's do something so we can identify, so we can empathize with our English language learners and our left-handed drawers as well. So let's draw a picture of a house in the air, but let's use our left hand.
Oh, that's not going to be pretty.
So all the listeners too, do this so you can experience what it might be like to be a left-handed learner and also an English language learner. And so let's draw a picture of a house in the air. Don't forget the roof and the door and some windows. Right, John drew a nice picture.
Full disclosure, I sometimes write with my left hand to pass meeting time.
Right.
But
so what was that like? What was that like, John? How'd you feel when you drew that picture?
Well, you have to concentrate a lot differently, right? And you have to give it much more concerted effort. And I think that you really have to focus on every movement or every stroke a little differently.
Yeah. How about you, Mona? How did you feel doing that?
I had to think about where to start. Normally I would go like this, but I'm like, it's different. So you have to really pay attention to where your starting point is, what's going to look like. Is it straight, not straight? Yeah, it's definitely different.
Great. And so how would you feel if I called you a left-handed learner? You already use your right hand. And how would you feel if I said, okay, from now on, you're a left-handed learner. We're just going to focus on how you draw with your left hand. How would you feel?
Yeah, not very good.
Sure.
No.
And so you know where I'm going with it. That's what the name English language learner implies. It ignores the fact that our students speak at least one language, some more than one, and it just focuses on how they speak English. And ironically, is if we make it fun, then they will learn English faster. But if we're just focusing on how they speak English, then we're not going to be effective, and neither will they. And so it's positioning them, our students, to be unsuccessful. And so if we call our students multilingual learners, then it's almost like calling you ambidextrous, because if you were to and I think John already has, if you learn how to use, both your left and right hand, well, we should give you credit for that and not just focus on how you use your left hand.
Again, I'm not ambidextrous. I've just passed the meeting time playing around with my left hand. So just make sure the listener, I'm not doing any parlor tricks next time I see you in person. Anyhow, go ahead.
Okay. I was hoping maybe you could do a demonstration, right, in my next workshop.
Not so much, not so much.
But that answers the question. And so as you see, I could just tell you that, but if we experience things, I think we can have more changes. And so there's a reason. And along that line also, and I think we were going to talk about this later, but we wrote a position paper, and it's the position of NCSM now to use the term multilingual learner. And so I encourage us all to use the term multilingual learner. If we want to use an acronym, we can just change that E to an M and say MLLs or MLS.
Yeah, and you know what, that timing is perfect. I actually wanted to ask you just about that, the position paper. So tell us more about the position paper about multilingual learners, and what does it mean to position multilingual learners?
All right. Thank you, John. So first of all, I was really honored to be one of the authors on this paper. And the reason I reached out to Dr. Shelley Jones was there was a position paper and it used the term ELLs. And so I said, well, let's change that and use some more of the most recent research. And so it's a joint effort between Todos and NCSM. And you can read, I believe, for free if you're a member. Is that right?
Oh, it's free. It's free to anybody. We made it open to anybody at this point.
Right. And so
go online.
Right. And it's about positioning multilingual learners. And so positioning, for example, using that term multilingual learners positions our students. Yes, we could use English language learners, but to position our students is important. And so I can answer that with another analogy, if you will. What do you think it's like to be a multilingual learner and learning math or another content subject in a second language? What's it like to learn math?
I personally can't imagine. I've talked with friends who are now, multilingual, and they talked about how they had to think about mathematics in their native language and then translate that back into English to communicate in the classroom, and that it was extra layers and challenges to it wasn't as intuitive or responsive for them.
Right. So how about if you experience that, and the listeners as well? I can teach a little math lesson in Spanish. So rather than me just telling you, you can experience that. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
¿Qué me puede decir la raíz cuadrada de 144? Mona, ¿te gustaría explicar a la clase la raíz cuadrada de 144?
Más despacio, por favor.
¿Te gustaría explicar a la clase la raíz cuadrada de 144?
Okay, so write something or other.
No, pero dilo en español, por favor, porque estamos aquí para aprender español.
Hablo nada.
Jano, ¿quieres explicar a todos nuestros escuchadores la raíz cuadrada de 144?
No.
No? Okay. I usually do that for 20 minutes because I'm a professor and I have my students have to stay in the class, where here I don't want our listeners to tune out, and so we'll keep that short. But how'd you feel?
My no was not a response. It was I
can understand pieces. So sad thing is I was actually a bilingual math teacher my first 2 years in the classroom.
Okay.
What was interesting though, over the 12 years in the classroom, my first 2 years, I had solely Spanish speakers.
Yes.
So because I was immersed in the conversations, my conversational Spanish was actually pretty good. But my last 10 years when I was teaching, and it was no longer bilingual, that was just a policy in the state of Arizona. However, I didn't have just Spanish speakers. At one of our schools, we had 52 different languages spoken. So I presented in English and did lots of other strategies to provide access to the content.
Sure.
But that's difficult.
Right.
Well, I was wanting you to just slow down a little bit and maybe repeat a couple of things, because there were things I thought I caught, but I wasn't sure. And then when you were talking to Mona, I was like, well, I don't know if
That's
I could
exactly
hear it
what I
again.
was asking him, John. I was telling him to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't hear you say that part. Sorry.
Sure.
I was still processing what numbers you were talking about.
Yes.
Right. I was like, wait, what did I catch? And then I wanted to hear it again, and things kept going. Right.
Sure. And so I was actually asking you the square root of 144. But
that's the square.
Right. But there was no context there. There was no visuals. There was no context. I mean, even if you knew the answer, would you raise your hand and share that? So it was just, pure arithmetic. So the point here, John, is to answer your question. That's why we need to position our multilingual learners, because it's hard to learn content in another language. It's not that you couldn't, answer the square root of 144 or do math. It's just we need, as Mona said before, we need to provide our students with access. And it's important to position our students as successful mathematicians and have them be part of that conversation. And a lot of times we ignore our students because we're not sure what to do. And so we need to position our students. And so what we can do, an example of positioning our students is we can get our students to work in pairs. And then we can say, listen to our students and then say, for example, Juan Jose says that 1/3 is greater than 1/4. and then, discuss with your partner, Juan Jose's thinking. And when we do that, we're positioning Juan Jose to be a successful mathematician.
One thing that I was told as a beginning teacher, that it was all about when you're teaching English language learners, it was, if you just provide a picture or model, they'll understand, right? You just have to provide that. So my question to you, because in the position statement, as well as the book, you talk about visuals are not enough. So what do you mean by visuals are not enough? Or how we need to ensure multilingual learners visualize themselves in our curriculum?
What a great question, Mona. So first of all, what we're doing is not working. The reason you invited me here was because it's not working. Our ELLs, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, are not successful in mathematics in general. Some are, but in general they're not. And so we need to change the way we're teaching. And so yes, we need to have visuals, but also we need to be culturally responsive. And so I think the litmus test is not only should we provide visuals, but can our students, including our multilingual learners, can they visualize themselves in our curriculum? And so that's really key, I think. Not only do we need to provide visuals for that linguistic support, but also are we being culturally responsive so our multilingual learners can visualize themselves in our curriculum? And a lot of times I'll work with teachers because, as I said, I give professional developments, and they'll say, oh yeah, well, we're being culturally responsive. And I'll say, okay, well, what book did you read today? And I'll say, okay, is that book about a multilingual learner? And it doesn't have to be all the time, but sometimes once a week, once a month, once a year, we need to have books about multilingual learners. Otherwise, they can't see themselves in the mirror, if you will. And it's also important for non-multilingual learners. It's called looking through the sliding door or the window. They need to see representation as well. And so what's sad to me is that nationally, 3/4 of our multilingual learners are identified as Spanish speakers. And yet I could hardly find books about, Spanish speaking multilingual learners. So I wrote a children's book myself, even though it's got nothing to do with math. I wrote a children's book. It's called Juan Jose, You Are Especial.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Is that right behind you that I can see you?
It is.
Sorry, listeners. I can see it in the background there.
Right. And so what I've done is that's an example of positioning.
Cool.
There's a picture of Juan Jose. I didn't draw this, but when I use the word especial, I'm just positioning certain students that understand those words. And so that's an example of positioning. And so, John and Mona, how did you learn, for example, fractions? Was it through pizza?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Pizza or sharing a cookie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Sure.
But it was all food that was very oriented towards what I experienced every day, not everybody else experiences.
I imagine I was the same. I'd have to think about that.
Okay. And that's why I'm asking, because Juan Jose in the book, he was born in the United States, like 80% of the multilingual learners. Juan Jose was born in the United States. So he likes pizza. He likes pepperoni pizza. But you know what? At home, he likes enchiladas verdes. And so I'm wondering if we could position our students and occasionally ask some questions about enchiladas verdes in fractions or however, whatever we're talking about mathematically.
That's a really nice example, Jim. And I like enchiladas verdes, so I'll have to make sure I work that into an upcoming problem and talk about why that's an important feature of our work, which makes me think about the next question I have for you, and that is a district leader, but for all of our math leaders who are listening, a question that we have for you are, what are some tips for mathematics leaders that you might offer to help them meet the needs of multilingual learners?
Sure. John, I have an acronym with 5 letters, and you can remember paths. And I asked this question, what path are you going to take? And so the P stands for position. We've talked about positioning. We can position our students not only where they sit to make sure our multilingual learners are in friendly places where people will support them, but also position them using, using a few words in Spanish or their first language. Second is access. We need, as Mona said, we need to provide our students with access. I didn't provide you with access when I asked you what the square root of 144 was. I assume that you could have told me if I provide you with access. But visuals aren't enough. It's not just enough to say, visuals. Also need to talk about your, about your culture and trying to make math interesting to you. And when we're working with multilingual learners, we need to consider that as well. The T stands for teach, in that we need to teach language, not only our students' first language, but also mathematical language and English. We need to teach language. So that's important as well. Often our teachers speak too much. And so one thing we need to do is to give our students more time to speak. And the H stands for John Hattie. I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Hattie's work, but it doesn't have to be Hattie's work. I really do like John Hattie's work, but I wanted to put an R there for research, but then I wouldn't have had that PATH acronym. So I'm using a Hattie.
Yeah, there you go.
From John Hattie.
That's meta-analysis, so we're good. Yeah, all research covered there.
And John, you're going to love the S. What do you think the S stands for?
Oh, I don't know. Struggle, maybe.
Struggle, sure. And so the S means like struggle. What can we do to engage our multilingual learners in struggle? And so that's the same thing. So it's paths. P is positioning, A is access, T is teach language, H is Hattie or any research-based strategies, and S is engage our students in struggle. Struggle is a good thing.
Yeah, it is without a doubt. That's really nice. That's really nice. That helps. And acronyms help us in those cases too. I was trying to make it parth, but that wasn't going to work. So I'm just going off on a tangent that I don't need to do right now. If you're listening in your car, feel free to think of another way to go about that. Yeah.
I'm gonna go off of your paths idea. And when you talk about access, so one of the things that NCSM published in April of 2020 was the position paper on detracking. And access, providing access is part of your work.
Yes.
Have you found any correlation or noticed anything around tracking and students who have English language learning needs?
Great.
Yeah,
so
I'm just curious, because is that part of the access? Because, if you're a math leader working in a district, is that part of the reflection you need to have? Is the type of access? It could be access to the content, but it also could be access to courses. So the access could be, yeah.
Sure, Mona, by all means. And I know, for example, Joe Bowler is someone who I like a lot. She told me in one of her presentations, she was talking about San Francisco, where they did away with the tracking and all the students did well. But be sincere, that's not an area that I've really addressed that much, specifically for multilingual learners. I don't really know the data, but my hunch is to say that tracking, is not good. And because it doesn't position our multilingual learners. I do know that statistically, multilingual learners are often on the bottom track. And once you're in that track, you stay stuck there.
That's exactly what happened. That was in my district. That was what I noticed is our students that were identified with language needs, they were typically in our below grade level courses.
Sure.
They predominantly stayed there. There was no access point. So I think that's really important for math leaders to be aware that access isn't just to content, but it's also to future learning. How are you providing access to future learning? That was really important.
And I'm going to push back, Mona, that our students, it's not like they have language needs. I know that's a lot of times we identify, but actually they're language experts. The fact that they speak one language and they're learning another in many ways, it's us that need to change, because they're experts, and if they can learn 2 languages or more, then they can learn the math as well when we do provide them with access. And so often our multilingual learners are put in these tracks when they're really capable, and we just have to give them more credit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to one last question. So I have started this. I have not finished all of it.
Okay.
I'm on the the growth mindset, positive, not the growth mind, positive math mindset section. So tell us a little bit about your book and how that would support math leaders in supporting our emerging multilingual learners.
Sure, thank you. As I said before, that I was going to use the term emergent bilinguals or multilingual learners in the title, but then I knew that not many people would buy the book because they say, well, we don't have any of those. So I used the term math for ELLs. And it's not easy to teach multilingual learners necessarily, but I try and make the strategies easy. And so the language I try and make as easy as uno, dos, tres, if you will. So that's the origin of the title. But the whole idea is I've used this with my teacher candidates. There's been some book studies, especially where I'm located in Texas. In Texas, there's been quite a few book studies, and that's the idea. We talk about the importance of having a mindset. We talk about access. We talked about teaching language and research-based strategies and productive struggle. And so it's very similar to paths, even though I don't come out and say that those terms. But I also trying to get you to experience because I think that just telling things don't work. And so I try and give as many as analogies as possible and some experience. Another thing, I'm still on your first question about being a game changer. When I first started writing books and giving workshops, I thought the most important thing was to be engaging and also to give good content. But I'm realizing now that there's a third component. You know what the third component is for me? The third component is transfer. And so in this book, I try and give you an opportunity to transfer. And it might be just to take one idea. And so whether it's you go to an NCSM conference and you listen to the speaker, always try and transfer. And by transfer, I mean, tell me one thing that you're going to do, tomorrow or next week or whenever. I think that's really important. And so in the book, I try and give you those opportunities to transfer some of the strategies, because there are a lot there, but we need to transfer that. Otherwise, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely. That's what you would want from any professional learning, is that it's a great day of professional learning. However, it's not going to make an impact unless you walk away and commit to doing something.
Correct.
So transfer part is really important. Well, I just want to say thank you for your time today. Thank you for making me think back to my Spanish and how little I actually remember.
No comment.
It was a really good conversation, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, so much for your time. And again, we appreciate all your work for our field.
And thank you, Mona and John. And let me just shout out to the listeners and, think about and how you can transfer, one thing that we've talked about, because I think that's so important as well. And thank you once again, Mona and John, for everything you do. You are game changers. And I really love NCSM. You're doing some wonderful things at NCSM. So thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. We hope you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders using the hashtag NCSMBold. Thanks again.